The White House is gearing up Monday for the release of a new book that blasts President Trump. Bob Woodward's Fear will hit stands Tuesday. The book details alarming allegations about how the White House functions. The famous journalist says he interviewed current White House officials for the account. In a tweet Monday, the president called the book a scam and claimed the quotes are made up. He goes on to say the author uses every trick in the book to demean and belittle. White House Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders also refuted Woodward's account in her first press briefing in nearly 3 weeks. However, the press secretary then switched gears, refocusing the conversation on a surprise announcement about North Korea. CBS News White House correspondent Weijia Jiang has the latest.
White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders announced Kim Jong Un wrote President Trump asking for a second meeting, which she says is in the works.
It was a very warm, very positive letter.
But just over 2 weeks ago, the president canceled what would have been Secretary of State Mike Pompeo's 4th trip to North Korea, citing a lack of progress in the effort to denuclearize Pyongyang. U.S. intelligence suggests North Korea still has the ability to produce 5 to 8 nuclear weapons a year. Over the weekend, North Korea marked the 70th anniversary of its founding without any intercontinental ballistic missiles in its military parade.
What signs of progress warrant this new optimism from President Trump?
The most recent parade this weekend, one of the first times, I believe, that they have had parades similar where they weren't highlighting their nuclear arsenal. We consider that a sign of good faith.
Sanders spent much of the briefing slamming Bob Woodward's new book depicting a dysfunctional administration. Earlier on Twitter, President Trump called Woodward a liar who was like a Dem operative prior to the midterms. But on CBS Sunday Morning, Woodward stood by his reporting.
You look at the operation of this White House, and you have to say, let's hope to God we don't have a crisis.
Weijia Jiang joins me now from the White House. So, Weijia, Bob Woodward's book comes out Tuesday. He is a well-known journalist. How is credibility coming into play as the White House tries to refute allegations in his account?
Yeah, the White House is working overtime to really point out the fact that Bob Woodward cites anonymous sources on deep background, which is a very common practice in journalism in order to get critical information and still protect sources. But that certainly is what we've seen from administration officials and the president himself, who has called Woodward a liar and says his entire book is a work of fiction. But, you know, of course, on the other hand, you know, Woodward has an entire career of reporting. He has brought down presidents in the past, and he certainly has a record of being extremely meticulous, and that is no different in this case. He says he has extensive notes. He has audio recordings of most of the interviews, and that's why, despite what the White House continues to say, it could end up being an issue because Woodward claims he has all this evidence to support his reporting.
And Weijia, you asked Press Secretary Sarah Sanders at the White House briefing Monday about this. Is the president preparing to take any legal action against Woodward?
You know, the reason I brought that up is because the president did first, right? He continues to talk about libel and libel laws, and he, again, continues to say that Woodward is lying about him. And so the question is, if, in fact, you know, Woodward's book is filled with lies defaming the president, why not use a tool of legal action to do something about it? That's why I asked if the president plans to file a lawsuit. And Sarah Sanders says, we'll keep you posted on that. And then she launched into a list of all the people who have come out and discredited Woodward's reporting, including top officials like the chief of staff, John Kelly, who is quoted in the book calling the president an idiot, and Defense Secretary James Mattis, who is quoted saying the president has an understanding of a 5th or 6th grader. And so Woodward actually talked about this today during an interview. He said, you know, frankly, those people are not telling the truth. because he stands by his reporting. He says he believes eventually the truth will come out. And so, he is not concerned that, what he is reporting is going to be disputed. And I think it also shows, if the president is not seeking legal action, that even though he is calling Woodward's bluff, perhaps he's not willing to take that extra step, because Woodward claims he has the goods. And, again, those goods could be exposed in a court of law if it came to that, if he had to produce those recordings, if he had to show those notes. And as of now, there is no lawsuit, according to Sarah Sanders, but she says she'll keep us posted.
Well, do we know, Weijia, how are these allegations affecting how people do their jobs inside the White House?
Kellyanne Conway over the weekend said repeatedly that this episode or episodes have actually brought staffers together, and that, they are all outraged by these allegations and that they are standing strongly in rejecting them. But the fact is, this extensive reporting, not only from Bob Woodward, but also from the account of what we saw in that anonymous New York Times op-ed by a senior administration official, goes back for several months and months, in fact, since the president took office. And so it's not new that staffers and the administration is experiencing this sort of chaos and potential distrust and really questioning of the president and his decision making. So perhaps they feel more exposed than before because these two accounts paint such a detailed picture, but it's not new for them to experience this and have to deal with it and grapple with it together. But the official word from the White House is that it's impacting them in a positive way because it's unifying. However, the fact is, this is a distraction. I mean, when you have Vice President Mike Pence talking about his willingness to take a lie detector test, that is a major distraction from, things that these staff members want to be doing to focus on the agenda.
Clearly an extraordinary set of circumstances here. Well, the press secretary obviously wanted to get away from these allegations and from talking about them. She spoke about the surprise reported letter from Kim Jong Un to President Trump. And the briefing also began with an economic advisor touting growth numbers.
Right.
Is part of the strategy here to essentially change the subject? And is there a way to gauge how effective that's been?
Well, I think part of the strategy is to point out all the good things that President Trump is doing, so his supporters and his base are reminded that, this is just one side of the story. They're painting the writers of this side of the story as liars, so let us focus on what's good. So certainly trying to shift the focus, but they're also injecting themselves into the narrative, right? Because President Trump just this morning was tweeting about Bob Woodward. Sarah Sanders came out very prepared to talk about Woodward, as well as the New York Times op-ed. But certainly they want to provide an alternative to show that, that they are making accomplishments, especially ahead of the midterm elections. So, yeah, they brought out, a presentation for all the economic numbers that, by the way, if you just look at the timing, seems to be in direct response to what President Obama said over the weekend in his condemnation of President Trump. He also said, let's not forget that the economic numbers that President Trump is touting, the spike in that actually started under my administration. And so here you have Kevin Hassert, who's the chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors, coming out today and disputing that. The charts that we were given show that actually this growth did not begin until President Trump took office. So it seemed to be in response to that other distraction that President Obama created when he, very surprisingly, directly went after President Trump for the first time, calling him out by name.
Yeah, the timing here is interesting. We are less than 2 months away from the midterms. So essentially is focusing on the economic good news, the White House plan, as best you can tell, Weijia, to try to direct this conversation nationally ahead of November.
Sure. When you look at the rallies, I mean, it is no doubt that President Trump is focusing on all of his accomplishments. We hear him time and time again touting everything he has done to make the country great again, whether it's the economy, whether it's, changing the shape of the Supreme Court, whether it's deregulating. So he does focus on those. But, it's undeniable that he's also spending time defending himself against Bob Woodward, the New York Times, other allegations, the Russia investigation. So, it has to be part of the narrative because he obviously does not want to ignore all the negative things or things that he perceives as negative. He wants to face them. And by doing that, he's creating his own narrative that, he's a victim and that, people should know that anything bad about him is a lie and is not true, and they should focus on all the things that he is doing for them. And to be fair, he has a list of accomplishments, but the two aren't mutually exclusive. Just because there are accomplishments within this administration doesn't mean there are a slew of questionable things that are newsworthy that need to be reported on. And so ahead of the midterms, certainly he's trying to balance the two and focus on what he believes is good as well as address what he believes is bad. But one remarkable thing, Elaine, that I want to point out is that for the first time, President Trump at a rally explicitly talked about how the midterm elections were also a vote about him. He said, he warned that Democrats want to impeach him. And so that's part of the reason why he was urging people to go to the polls, because he acknowledged that impeachment hearings were a possibility. And the fact that a sitting president is doing that and also reassuring supporters that he is competent and fit for the job is extraordinary.
Yeah, really remarkable times, Weijia Jiang at the White House for us. Weijia, thank you.
Thanks, Elaine.